We're talking today with Anthony Critchlow of Boise, Idaho, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. All right, now can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
Born in Boise, Idaho, 1948, November 9th.
Okay.
Born and raised there. Didn't leave Boise until I joined the Army.
All right, so did you go through high school then?
Yes, I graduated from Bora High School in Boise in 1967.
Okay, and what did your family do for a living while you were growing up?
Well, my dad passed away when I was really young. I was 10 years old when he passed away. So he was what they had called back then an auto body mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Took care of dents and dings in car bodies. Mom was stay-at-home mom until he passed away, and then she worked at odd jobs after he had passed away. Dishwasher, worked in a hotel as a maid, things like that.
Okay, and then did you go to work while you were still in high school?
No. No.
So your mother was able to support you and you could just be a student at that point?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
We got his Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
and she worked a little bit of a job to make ends do.
Okay. And while you were still in high school, were you paying attention to kind of what was going on in Vietnam and at all? Or were you aware there was a war on?
I was aware there was a war, didn't really pay much attention to it at the time.
Okay. And then when you finished high school, did you go to work or what did you do?
I did work as a dishwasher at the same restaurant my mom was working at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was 19, so I knew that the draft was going to be coming after me real soon. So I actually went in and enlisted before the draft got me.
All right. Now, when you went in to enlist, were you able to sort of specify what kind of assignment you wanted to train for? How did they handle that?
Right, I took a test, I think they call it an ASVAB.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I took the test, and I waited, and they came back and they said, you got such a high score, here's the book, you can pick any job you want. And they handed me a book that was about 6 inches tall and said, pick a job. And I thought, sure, I'm not sure what it was. Got down to the C's and it said cook, and I said, well, I'm working in a restaurant right now, let's do cook.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I did it, so I enlisted as a cook.
What kind of reaction did the recruiter have to that choice?
I don't really remember, but I think he was dumbfounded because the scores were so high with the ASVAB.
So he thought you'd go for intelligence or communications or
Correct.
something like that. Yeah. Cook. Okay. All right. Now, when did you sign up? I think it was November, end of '67, or
Right. I went into basic training in November of '67,
Okay.
so probably about the first of, because it takes a little while, so it was probably about the 1st of November I went down and got everything taken care of.
All right. And then where did you go for basic?
Basic training was Fort Lewis, Washington.
All right. How would you describe the facility there, the camp you were in?
World War II barracks. They treated you really nice because you're in basic training. You're like one step above pond scum. But they just treated you like you're in basic training. You try to teach you everything you're supposed to know as being a soldier.
All right. When you first go in, is there a processing or stuff that you do in the first few days?
Correct, yes. You go in, you get all your shots, they take more tests. I remember there was one that they give you a speed reading on how to do Morse code,
Mm-hmm.
to see if you'd be moved into a different area. And of course I didn't do very well with that. Again, got all your shots, took more tests. They taught you how to take a weapon apart, taught you how to march, how to run, how to walk in cadence and things like that.
All right.
How to dress properly.
Okay. And what kinds of things do they do to try to instill discipline in the soldiers?
If you do anything wrong, it was automatically 25, 30 push-ups. So if you stood there and looked at them cross-eyed, then you were down doing 25 push-ups. If you got to formation too late, you were down doing push-ups. If your bunk wasn't right, you were down doing push-ups.
Now, was there a level beyond push-ups if you kept screwing up?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, not really.
All right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to just living in the Army there at training?
I don't think it was that hard. I was one of the more overweight people there. I've always been overweight. So it was a little harder for me to do everything they wanted me to do, you know, the sit-ups, the push-ups, the runs. I was always the slowest person at doing everything, so consequently got nailed more times for push-ups than anybody else.
All right. But in terms of just the business of having to follow orders and have someone else tell you what to do,
Oh, I had no problem with that.
okay.
My mother told me where to go all the time, so I was pretty good at listening and being told what to do.
All right. What about the guys around you? Were there people you were training alongside who were having more issues?
Yes, there was a lot of them. Most of them were guys that were drafted, so they didn't want to be there, so they weren't going to do anything they were supposed to do. You know, they made it really hard on themselves instead of saying, yes, sir, let's do this and that. They were always bickering and not doing what they're supposed to do. Of course, consequently, we all got in trouble because of a certain minority of folks.
Now, within your training unit, was there a point where the other recruits will start to impose discipline on the ones who were cut-ups, or do you just put up with it?
Yeah, I think they had a few blanket parties, as I remember, in basic. Guys that weren't doing right, they'd roll you up in a blanket and beat the crap out of you.
And did that work?
Got everybody in trouble, so I don't think it really worked.
All right. In the end, what proportion of the guys who started out in your companies or platoons at this point?
Both. It was a
Okay.
company with I was like in the first platoon, second
Okay.
platoon, or whatever. Each barracks was its own platoon.
Okay. What proportion of the guys who started with you in that group do you think finished basic training on schedule?
I think all of us did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're not washing people out or making a bunch of them go back and do it over?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
No.
And so now you go in November. So when was it 8-week basic or?
8-week basics, yes.
So
November, December.
So you're there. Were you there during the holidays, or did they send you home?
They actually sent us home for Christmas, yeah. And then made sure everybody said, you know, they said make sure you come back and on time, or we were going to send somebody and put you in prison.
All right.
So everybody showed up. Well, I think maybe there was one or two that never showed up, but I'm sure they got caught sooner or later.
Okay. Now, did you know at this time that you actually had a place reserved for you to go train as a cook, or was that up for grabs at this point?
They kind of kept that in the open, saying that everybody was going to become infantry, and I was thinking, no, I'm supposed to be a cook. I signed a contract, and all these orders came down, and I had orders to go to Fort Lee, Virginia for my training, my advanced training. That's where they do all the cook trainings, Fort Lee.
All right. Now, what was that like?
Culture shock, small town, white boy on the east side of the United States, where you're kind of like not the minority back then, but you're not the majority of people there. So, you know, it was a culture shock working with a lot of black people,
Okay.
African Americans.
Yeah. And did you have, and were the sergeants training you, were they mostly black and people who'd been there for a while, or?
I'd say it was about 50-50.
Okay.
I think the DIs were half and half. Yeah.
And what does cook training actually consist of?
Just basic thing, how to read a recipe, how to read the worksheets, how to make the food. We did what was called small quantity cooking for a while. You make just little batches of food like you'd cook at home. And then you'd move on to, we cooked everything. I mean, meat, vegetables, baked, all this. And then that food was sent on to the mess halls, and they put it into the regular chow line. And then eventually we actually went to the big mess halls and worked for a little while.
Okay. And how long did that process take?
Again, I think it was 8 weeks.
Another 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's see, is Fort Lee close to Washington, D.C., or was close to Richmond, or where is
It's, I think it's south of Richmond.
it? Okay. Petersburg?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So it'd be north side of town, I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
All right. And now from there, did you get any liberty or free time? Could you go off the base?
Yeah, we did go off base. We did a lot of tours with the USO. Every weekend, you could go down to the rec center and sign up for tours. And so I made like 3-4 trips to Washington D.C. It was always Washington D.C. So we'd go up there. USO had a building. They'd drop us off at the building. They'd give us lunch. you'd go do your tour, and you had to be back at a certain time, and then they'd take you back to Fort Lee. And then sometimes we stopped off at the cigarette factory, as I remember. So you go through and watch them make cigarettes
All right.
on the way back to Fort Lee.
All right. Were you a smoker at that time?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So you got some samples?
No, they didn't give samples.
Oh.
You had to buy,
had to buy
cigarettes. Yes.
Oh, well. All right. Now, when you were doing these tours and so forth, were you going around in uniform?
Yes, Class A uniform.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did anybody notice you were paying attention to you as you're walking around Washington?
Not really. No.
Okay.
I mean, it seemed like everybody was in military uniform back then because all the small bases around D.C. were sending GIs to there to have a weekend off.
So it's not a place where you're really observing a whole lot of anti-war activity or anything like that?
No, never saw any.
Yeah. And were you aware of sort of the ongoing anti-war movement at the time? Because we're not going to get into 68 and stuff, or was that
Well,
not really?
that's 67, 68. Actually, it would be 68 for
Yeah.
AIT. No, I don't actually remember seeing much until I got back in 70 then.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it does kind of build up, and Tet Offensive early 68 starts it, but even there, that's still you're pretty close to around that time. So,
Right.
yeah. Anyway, but the main point is it's not something that you're really seeing or that you're really aware of at the
No.
time. Okay. Now, at the end of those 8 weeks, do they assign you to a base in the U.S., or are you ticketed for Vietnam right away?
No, actually, and I forgot, I didn't give you all the information. I actually was assigned to Europe. I was
Okay.
supposed to go to Frankfurt, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went home on vacation from there, which coincided with my sister getting married. So there was a trip from Fort Eustis to Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
My mom and a friend of the family drove there. They had the wedding, then I drove with them back to Idaho.
Mm-hmm. And then from there, did you fly someplace from Idaho then to get where you were going next, or?
Yeah, we flew to Germany.
Okay. And did you had to go back to some other base first, though, right? To fly out of?
Fort Dix.
Okay. All right. And what unit were you assigned to in Germany?
Well, now when I got to Germany, they said, and we got to the replacement station, they said, well, Private Critchlow, whatever I was then, the guy re-enlisted, so we don't have a place for you in Germany.
Oh.
But we do have an opening in Vicenza, Italy. And I thought, okay, Vicenza, Italy, don't know what that is. I said, well, Italy, yeah, okay, I'll go. And then they sent me down to Italy, and I was assigned to a base in Vicenza. And then when I got there, that cook had re-enlisted, so they had no place for me. So they sent me on to Verona, Italy,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually had a space for me there at the Army Airfield in Verona. And I was there for a year.
All right. Can you describe a little bit of what that experience was like?
Oh, you just went to work every day, did your cooking. It was the normal 24 hours on, 24 hours off. Every other weekend you worked, so you got one weekend out of every 2 weeks where your time off. And then we'd go downtown, shopping, go to bars, walk around. Also did more tours. Went to Venice for a couple of times. Buddy and I, we went up into Innsbruck, Austria one time, took a train, just to see the sights.
And when you're traveling in Europe, again, do you do that in uniform or civilian clothes? for that?
Civilian clothes.
Okay.
Yeah, you didn't travel in military uniform back then.
All right. Yeah, what kind of attitude do the Italians seem to have toward the people on the base?
They like you as a person, they hate you as an American. And that's the way it was. We got locked down a few times because there was a lot of communists in Verona. And every time they'd have a rally, we were locked in on the base. We couldn't go out because they were afraid somebody would get hurt. But when they weren't having the rallies, they didn't care. They just, as long as you were spending money, they didn't care who you were.
All right. Now, when you're the cook on the base, you're cooking standard Army chow, right?
Correct.
Yeah. No, nothing rubbing off on you from being in Italy or.
No. When you cook for the Army, what they tell you to prepare, you prepare. You have to follow the recipe exactly. You can never take away from a recipe. You can add to it, but when you only have salt, pepper, and a few condiments, you're not going to add too much to it.
Right.
You're locked into following the recipe.
All right. Now, did you have a hope that maybe you just get stay in Europe or?
I volunteered to go to Vietnam.
Okay. And how did you come to that choice?
I thought Italy was kind of boring, and I thought there were better choices in life than be in Italy for 3 years and then get out. I thought that's where I needed to be.
Mm-hmm. All right. And did you know any more about Vietnam by this time? I mean, were you paying attention to whatever news was available, or?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I just knew it was where the action was, and if you're in the Army, you probably should be where the action is.
All right. And so when does your time in Italy come to an end?
Almost a year to the day I got there. I got there in like June. Yeah, about June, and I left there the following June.
Okay. And now do you go home and then on to Vietnam?
Correct, yes. I went home for 30 days, and then did I fly? I went to Fort Lewis again. That was my port of debarkation.
Okay.
And went through a little bit of preparatory training at Fort Lewis. By that time, they had the M16, so they taught us how to break the M16 down, how to maintain it. Took us out, and I think we qualified with it. And then we got on airplanes at McCord, and then flew on to Vietnam.
Okay. Now, were you on chartered civilian aircraft or military aircraft? Or?
Chartered civilian. I think it was Flying Tigers.
Oh, that's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then did you go via Alaska and Japan or some other route?
You know, I think it was through Alaska. I think we flew into Alaska, and just stayed there long enough to refuel the plane, and then flew on to Japan, and then Japan to Vietnam.
All right. And then where did you land in Vietnam?
Cam Ranh Bay.
Okay. And what was the mood like on the plane on that? Do you remember anything about that, or what you were thinking at the time?
People were just talking, reading books, smoking cigarettes, chit chat, quiet. When we landed, all the stewardesses were crying. I remember that as we were getting off at Cam Ranh Bay.
All right. Now, were you landing during the day or at night?
We landed during the day.
Okay. And what sort of was your first impression of Vietnam, either as you flew in or when they opened up the door?
Well, flying in, it was sandy because you were coming in over the coast, and in Cam Ranh Bay it's nothing but sand. From the time you get off the airplane to the time you get on another airplane going someplace, you're living in sand everywhere. It was hot and muggy, and they told us, as I remember, as we were getting off the plane, they said, if we get any incoming, run away from the airplane as fast as you can, because the airplane's going to close the doors and take off, because they're not going to sit around waiting on something, because they had been getting mortared as they came in for landing.
All right.
So nothing happened to us. We landed safe and sound.
And then what did they do with you once you were off the plane?
Again, you go to a reception station, they get your name, and then they decide where you're going to go. That takes a couple of days. I think I was there 2 or 3 days.
Okay. Now, have they done anything with you to kind of prepare you for the Vietnam experience? Have they done that at Fort Lewis? Or?
That was done at Fort Lewis, yes. They actually took us to a Vietnamese village in Fort Lewis, Washington, which, in amongst all the pine trees. They had hollowed out trees, trying to show us how you'd get ambushed and things like that. It was kind of a joke, because all the guys that were there that were training us were people that had come back from Vietnam, and they just would tell you straight out, okay, this is the way that's set up, but don't pay attention to any of this. When you get in country, you'll go through a better training.
Of course. Now, you're going in as a cook, so that could be a little bit different. All right. So what assignment did you get then?
I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, and then my P training, the in-country training, was down in Benoit.
Okay.
And then that was maybe a week or 2 weeks.
Okay, that's a big base outside of Saigon.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And what did that training consist of?
How to pull guard duty at the bunkers. We did a lot of guard duty. Again, we did, they had a little bit of jungle in the middle of the base, as I remember. So we'd do patrols through this little jungle, and then they'd have Vietnamese people attack us with, blanks and stuff. And then they'd turn it around, we would do the ambush, and then the Vietnamese people would walk through. And that was kind of how we got trained. And then they showed us how to load people onto helicopters if they were injured. Just the basic things that you might run across.
Okay. And was this something that any new enlisted personnel coming into the division would do?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So you would be there with riflemen and whoever else might be there?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
It didn't matter who you were, what your job was. There were infantry, I was a cook, there were medics, and there were clerks, and any job description in the Army, they were there.
All right. Now, having completed that then, what did they do with you?
Got us on a C-130, and we flew up to Camp Evans.
Okay. And where is Camp Evans relative to Hue or the DMZ or?
Between the DMZ and Hue, I'm not sure how many miles north of Hue, but maybe 10, 15, I'm not sure.
And it's fairly close to the coast, but not actually on it?
Correct,
Right?
yeah.
Okay. And the Camp Evans was the base for at least 1/3 Brigade of 101st Airborne at this time.
Right. I know there was artillery there, there was aviation. The Seabees had a big contingency there as you came in on the left-hand side of the main entrance. The only entrance. No, I guess there was other entrance. The main entrance, there was a big Seabee camp because we used to go down there and scrounge stuff from them.
All right. Now then, once you land at Camp Evans, what do they do with you?
I think they had, by then we knew exactly who we were being assigned to, so the representatives from the different units picked us up. I honestly don't remember. I remember getting off the airplane. I actually took some pictures of that airplane, and it was hot. It was so hot. And I've never been in a place where the sun was so bright. And that was the things that impressed me. So I took a picture, and even to this day, when I look at that picture, it's like, it was hot that day.
All right.
And that was my introduction to Camp Evans.
Okay. And then you go to you have a company area or whatever was wherever the headquarters company is for the battalion that you're attached to.
Right.
And then do they just have you start cooking right away?
Yeah, basically, you went in, they introduced you to the mess sergeant, they assigned you a place to stay, and they told you what shift you were going to be working on. And because there was 2 shifts, you got afternoon shift, morning shift that rotates, and then you had the night bakers.
Now, how was this duty different from what you've been doing in Italy?
Italy wasn't quite as hot. And when you looked out the back window of the mess hall, there were these beautiful mountains behind, across the valley and behind us, and always remind me of when I was living in Boise, because there was always snow on the mountains in the wintertime. In Vietnam, well, there was mountains there also, but it was just down and out hot.
All right. You're cooking the same recipes and the same things that you were doing before?
Yes, basically. But in Vietnam, you either got chicken or you got roast. So we were always taking roast and cutting them up into steaks, and we had chicken, of course. Turkey was only on holidays, as I remember. But so it was roast beef and chicken, 90% of the time, as I remember.
And then let's see, just potatoes, canned vegetables.
Canned vegetables, instant mashed potatoes. We had salads, cabbage. Mostly it was coleslaw because cabbage holds up pretty good in hot weather, cold weather. So we made a lot of coleslaw. We did get lettuce, tomatoes, other vegetables, but not very often. When you got them, they were pretty much no good. You'd get a case of, let's say, tomatoes. You might get 1 tomato out of there that was usable, and the rest of them were all rotten.
All right. And then sort of what was your sort of daily life like there while you were in the camp?
Well, if you'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, make the lunch and breakfast and lunch, and then you'd get off. They might have something else for you to do: work on a truck, work on a generator, go for a water run, go for a ration run. Other than that, they just kind of left you alone. You just go back to your hooch and stay there until the next day. Start it all over again. Next day you'd go to work at noon because you serve the lunch and then make supper. The next morning you get up and make breakfast and lunch, and then that's how it worked.
All right, so you kind of work around the clock like that.
Mhm.
Okay, and
No
yeah.
days off. It was straight through.
All right. Now, when you read about Vietnam and you read about the various camps and so forth, including actually Camp Evans in particular, there's a lot of stuff that gets recorded about a lot of sort of morale issues and problems in the rear areas, whether it's drug use or there's racial tensions or kind of various kinds of insubordination and things like that. And I mean, how much of that did you actually see?
Almost daily, because it was the African American guys hated the white guys. The white guys couldn't understand it. Some of them did. So there was always a little tension, but we always worked together to get the job done. But we never hung out together. As much as you'd try, it just never would work. And then since I was an E5 when I got to Vietnam, so I was an NCO. So you can't hang around with the lower ranking people.
Right.
So you'd hang around with the higher ranked NCOs, and it was a mixture of white and black there. And there was no problems there because you're an NCO and you just do your job.
So the real split or whatever racially was sort of really among the privates and spec corps
yeah,
and whatever.
yeah, E4 and below. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the tension
That
was.
kind of thing. The rest of you guys are sergeants. Now, the sergeants that you're working with were some of these men who were on a second or a third tour, or were they kind of like you? And just first
No, I think everybody that we had there were all on their first tour. A lot of them were getting ready to retire. It was their last year in the Army, and
Okay.
or last 2 years in the Army, and they were going to be retiring right after Vietnam.
So they had a career in the Army in other places,
Right.
and at some point got rotated through,
Correct.
and it's their turn. All right. So you've got guys who were fairly old then?
Yeah, I thought they were old.
They used to be.
Yeah, until I got to the same age, and I was only 42 when I retired, and I thought, wow, those guys weren't really that old, were they? So,
All right. Now, was there a lot of drug use on the base?
yeah, I think there was. Not because I stayed with the NCOs. There was no drug use there. A lot of alcohol, but no drugs. They did, however, have classes that you could go to and familiarize yourself with what marijuana looked like, smelled like, and what it would do to you if you smoked it. And I always thought that was kind of really weird. All these NCOs were having this class smoking marijuana, and I thought that's a really unique aspect on what's going on in life. So
Now, and this is 1969 we're talking about
Correct,
now,
yeah.
late part of 69. Were there problems with harder drugs there? Was heroin there? Or
I know the guys smoked the cigarettes they could buy downtown, and how they got there, I'm not sure, called OJs. And it was a pre-made cigarette, and it had OJ on it, and it stand for opium and marijuana. So it was an opium-laced marijuana cigarette. And I know there were some guys that smoked that.
all right. As far as you can tell, did any of this kind of stuff really affect job performance?
Sometimes the guys wouldn't get to work on time, they moved a little slow, but they all eventually would do their job. It just, if Billy Bob didn't show up at 4 o'clock in the morning, you went to wake him up, he was drunk or stoned, you kept sending somebody back until he'd show up, and eventually they show up. Then you just tell somebody about it, and they'd say, well, what are you going to do?
All right. Now, you mentioned people going into town. Was there sort of some kind of village that sprung up outside of the camp, or was there a real town nearby? Or?
Oh, yeah, there's a couple of towns between Hue and Camp Evans that you go to. 101st had a rule, though, as I remember, 1 foot off the street, because you could hitchhike anywhere you wanted to, from Camp Evans to Phu Bai to Camp Eagles. You could actually walk the street and hitch a ride with an army truck going by. 1 foot off of the edge of the road, and it was an automatic court-martial. But that doesn't stop people from picking you up or coming up to you and talking to you on the street. You just couldn't leave the roadway because they didn't want anybody getting into any problems.
All right. And were there some people who would get into problems anyway?
Yeah, I'm sure there was. I don't offhand remember any, but somebody had to be getting out there and getting the stuff because you could find those cigarettes anywhere.
Yeah.
You could find bags of marijuana anywhere.
But were there bars or prostitutes or other things like that all out in these places?
Sure there were, but we weren't allowed to go to any of the bars or any of the ladies. Again, that's more than 1 foot off the street, and the MPs were always going up and down the road looking, and they'd stop and talk to you and ask you where you're going. And you had to be off the road by 5 o'clock, I think.
Okay.
Because all the Army vehicles were off the road by 5. So you'd better have hitched a ride to wherever you were going.
All right. Now you had requested to go to Vietnam.
Correct.
Because that was sort of where the action was, and now you're a cook at Camp Evans. Was there any kind of enemy activity that affected Camp Evans? Did you ever get mortared or rocketed or anything like that?
Rockets. Yeah, they dropped a few rockets in between where the mess hall was and where headquarters company was. There was like an amphitheater, and they had a couple of rockets land in there and tear things up. But they never made any contact with any of our buildings, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened 2 or 3 times.
All right. Now, were you satisfied with the situation there? You're working in this big camp, and you get rocketed occasionally. And were you now where the action was, or?
Not really. I could have stayed at Camp Evans the entire time, but every time they'd open up, one of the units, one of the companies would be going someplace, like they'd relieve different battalions on different fire bases. So that's those people would leave the fire base, we would take it over and be at that fire base for X amount of time while the other unit was doing a stand down. And so I started volunteering for that because I didn't want to be stuck at the base. I wanted to go someplace, see maybe a little stupidly more action.
Mm-hmm. And were you aware at that point what guys with rear area jobs were called or how they were referred to?
Oh, right from the get-go, I knew exactly what we were called. They were, as soon as they heard that I was a cook, oh, well, you're a RIMP.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't take kindly to that at all.
All right.
If I was going to be a RIMP, I was going to be one that was not on Camp Evans. I was going to be someplace else all the time.
Okay. And what was the first fire base you went out to?
Firebase Blaze, and I think that's on the edge of the Idaho somewhere.
Okay. Now, is this still late 69, or have you made it to early 70 by now?
Oh, no, still 69.
Okay. All right, yeah, because there's still activity in the Idaho for that period. They eventually pull back out when the monsoon comes in.
We actually dismantled Firebase Ripcord. We were the last unit there.
Blaze, you mean?
Excuse me, Blaze, yeah. Getting ahead of myself. We actually tore it down. We took the mess hall that was there, took it apart, burned all the wood. Anything that was made out of wood was burned, and then we pulled all of our gear out, put it on a helicopter, and flew back to Camp Evans when it was over with.
All right. About how long did you stay out there?
That one, maybe a month.
Okay. Yeah. What was it like going out there the first time?
Well, we went out on a helicopter. I was in a Chinook, and it was just interesting. You loaded all the gear up. We had a mule, so we loaded all of our food supplies. The equipment was out there. We were just taking over for some unit that was there, so we didn't have to bring any equipment at all. So all we had to do was show up with food and whatever we needed. And we put all that on a mule. The helicopter landed. We shoved the mule out the back, pushed it away from the helicopter. It took off, and then we drove over to the mess hall, which wasn't very far away because it was up on top of a hill.
All right. And for people who were watching this and they're not going to know what a mule was.
Mule is it's a platform with a motor underneath it.
Okay.
Kind of like an ATV today. You sit on the front edge of it with your feet hanging over the front in a little basket. That's where your gas pedal was. Steering wheel came off to the side, as I remember, off to the side. And you had a gear shift. And it was like a giant lawnmower because it had a pull starter on it, no electric start.
All right. And then physically, how would you describe the fire base? What did it look like to you?
That was a kind of a shock because everything was dusty, dirty. Everybody lived in little holes in the ground. At Camp Evans, you lived in a building, a hooch. 20, 30 feet long, 12 feet wide. And then on Firebase Blaze, you lived in a hole in the ground that was just long enough for a cot on one side, maybe one on the other side, maybe 2 or 3 high. It was interesting life.
Yeah. Now, did the base come under attack at all while you were there?
No, never did. Yeah, experienced my first Mad Minute there, and nobody told us about what Mad Minutes were. And we were standing up there, and it was in the evening, and then all kinds of hell breaks loose. You see people shooting off into the woods. And one of the other cooks and I were just standing there looking at each other and said, are we being attacked? So we kind of hid behind a building, and somebody came out and said, it's not an attack, it's just a Mad Minute. What's a Mad Minute? So they had to explain to us what it was. And after that, it would happen 2 or 3 times a night. And it was like, oh, Mad Minute, not to worry about it.
Okay. And what did they tell you it was? When they were giving you the explanation, because again, the audience may well not know that.
Well, they thought we were stupid because we didn't know, I think. But, I can't really say for sure.
Well, isn't just everybody firing their weapons for...
They get a call, evidently, down on the bunker lines, and they say, Mad Minute, and you fire absolutely everything you've got. Mortars, rifles, artillery would fire up into the hills, and you shoot anywhere. It doesn't, not a specific place, you just shoot up and down the hillside, you make tracer pictures on the mountainside, things like that. We had a quad 50 just a little ways from us, and they just shot everything up.
Right. And what was the logic behind it? Why would you do that?
In case the enemy was sneaking in on you, they wouldn't know if they were in the middle of sneaking in, they would get shot with a Mad Minute, or they might get all the way up to the wires. They never knew. So it was a kind of a deterrent, I think, to keep them from sneaking in, keep the sappers away.
And what was the weather like while you were there? Just hot, or?
At that time, it was hot. It wasn't monsoon season yet, so it was just hot, muggy. Since it was up in the mountains, it was at least a little cooler. In the evenings, it would get cool. During the day, it was still ungodly hot.
And were you on a hilltop?
Yes, we were on the side of a hill as you come into Blaze. Down in the bottom, there was a more camp, and that's where we actually went down to get our rations and things. Got water down there. And the artillery was down there, and then up by us there was a little bit of artillery. So and we had the big helicopter pads there.
And with the infantry units, kind of, were you with just one company out there at that time, or did you have the whole battalion? Or?
No, I think it was just company. I'm not sure. That's been a long time ago.
And so the infantry would go out and patrol and go in and out and that kind of thing.
I'm assuming they did. I don't know if they did very many patrols out there or not. We were never told what was going on.
And did you have to pull perimeter duty or anything like that?
At Blaze, no.
Okay.
No. Once we got to these places, we were in the center and everybody was on the outside, so we never did bunker guard.
Now, were you cooking with the same kinds of equipment or whatever that you would at a large base?
Correct, yeah. The Army field stoves and stuff. M1952 ranges and M1961 fire units, I think is what they called them, or an M1, which is same as an M1 machine gun, but oh no, not M1, M2, M2 fire units.
All right. Yeah. So really, it was doing the same work and pretty much with the same supplies. Now, was it harder? So were you getting less of any kind of supplies or rations than you had elsewhere, or were you handing out a lot of C rations or?
C rations only for lunch, and you always served a hot breakfast and a hot supper at the fire bases. That way, because guys were out doing things during the day, so they couldn't come back in to eat lunches and stuff. But they tried to have them there for breakfast, and they had tried to get them back there for supper.
Okay. All right. So you do this, and then basically, do you now go and repeat this kind of thing on several different fire bases after that?
Correct. Yes.
All right.
Again, the people go in for stand down, we'd come in, take over, use their equipment, go get the food, feed them, and then when their stand down was done, they'd come back out. We'd load up on the trucks in certain places and then come back.
Okay.
Blaze and Ripcord were the only 2 places we flew to because they were so far away.
All right. And what other bases did you work on?
We went to Birmingham and Bastogne, or Bastogne and Birmingham. I'm not sure what how it was actually physical. We went to one, did the stand down, and then since they were in line with each other, we went to the second one, and we were there for like 2 weeks each one, maybe a week each one, and we just take over the equipment. And
now, was this getting into monsoon season by this time, or was still activity going on?
I remember the monsoons. I just don't remember what time they were. I remember, rain, cats, dogs. there was actually a typhoon that, I think that was, maybe that was in the spring, so we were on Ripcord when we watched a typhoon come through the lowlands.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been probably in the January and February. It was raining as cats and dogs. I remember that. I just don't remember the time of year.
All right. And during the monsoons, raining like that, is there any way to stay dry?
Our hooches were pretty dry. You just run between the two buildings, and that was it. I mean, it was only a distance of maybe 20, 30 feet from where I stayed to the building. So, you know, you had the regular Army rain gear if you had to work outside, if you're maintaining the stoves and such. So.
All right. Now, as you're going around, you're moving from base to base. You have kind of the same team of people that you're working with the whole time?
You know, there was just a group of us that were always the ones that volunteered to go.
Okay.
And as for the E7s, the higher ranking NCOs, they just kind of begrudgingly, okay, it's your turn. I went the last time. It's your turn.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of worked their way through the senior NCOs.
Yeah. So one of them would have to go with you when you were doing that?
For the most part, yes. Yeah. Ripcord was the only one that I went up and I was, didn't have an E7 in charge. I went up there by myself. Now we had an E7 come up there once or twice, and because I was gone for a little while. I went on R&R during Ripcord. So I know there was an E7 and an E5 up there at the time.
All right. And then, so when did you actually go out to Ripcord?
I think I was up there on the 13th of March. I was up there 1 or 2 days after they took it for the, because they went up there on April 1st and got ran off. And then the next time they went up and stayed. And we were up there with the mess hall 2 or 3 days later.
Okay, so that's probably May then.
It would be in May?
Because you said March first. Because the middle of March, they made the first attempt, and they got pushed off, or left, or whatever. And then the second attempt was April 1st, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And then they actually go up for good.
So it had to be, yeah, maybe it was in April then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They go.
You know, it's been a long time.
Right.
I haven't really been thinking about it that much.
Yeah, well, that's we have Robin Graham's book, so we could kind of go back. You can go back and figure out exactly when you went up there.
There you go.
But anyway, okay. So, but basically, yeah, it's a Firebase though. That's one was difficult to establish. It took the 101st 3 tries to actually get the base set up.
Right.
But then, so you go in. So there's already an infantry company there, and they're setting up.
Artillery was there already. Yeah. The Vietnamese artillery was on the lower side. The Americans were on the top, and our infantry was around the perimeter.
Right. Okay. Now, what kind of setup did you have for a field kitchen there?
Well, originally they put us in a trench that was sitting right on the helicopter pad, and then they decided, because so many helicopters come in on a daily basis, that probably wasn't the smartest thing. Plus, we couldn't figure out how we were going to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I left for some reason, and then when I came back, they had dug another hole just off the helicopter pad, and between the helicopter pad and the 105s, the Vietnamese artillery, there was another trench that had been dug. So they made a hole in the ground, probably 12 feet long, 10 feet wide. It was deep enough that I could stand up without touching the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
Put walls in, put PSP for the roof, covered the roof with a tent, and then put sandbags on top of that to make it waterproof. We had an entrance coming in, an entrance going out. The bunker right next to us was called the electric bunker, because it was the only bunker besides the main bunkers that were up on the helicopter pad that had electricity.
Mm-hmm.
So they ran us electricity into the mess hall. And we had a little place on one end to sleep. We had another little place on the other end to store rations, ice chest in the back, a grill and a serving line to the front. It was just big enough for the guys to walk through, get their food, and walk on out.
Okay. So they don't get to sit down there and eat. There's not any room for that.
No,
Yeah.
you had to go back to your
holes or
holes
positions.
to
Yeah.
eat. Yep. And then at noontime, we'd go up and hand out sea rations, which were on the other side of the fire base, over by the ammunition bunkers for the 105s,
Okay.
the American 105s.
All right. And during the time that you were there, I don't know, how dangerous was the duty of being on Ripcord?
You know, they kept saying that we were surrounded, or that the enemy was out there, but we never got fired on at first. We went through like 3 weeks of so much fog that you couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of you. And we all kept thinking, boy, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Nothing ever happened until the fog lifted. As I remember now, the books, everything, all the books I read, it says on July 1st they started firing. I came back from an R&R in the last week of June. And as my mind remembers it, when I got back, we were getting one mortar in the morning, one in the afternoon.
Now, was that a single round? Or
One single round.
Okay.
They were, I guess it's called registering positions.
Yeah.
One, and it was always like on this side of the Firebase or that side of the Firebase. And then a day or two later, we got 2 in the morning, 2 at night in the afternoon. Next day, 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. And this worked all the way up until July.
And so, was there noticeably more activity July 1st onward, or because you weren't there too much longer?
I wasn't there. I left because I was getting ready to go home. So I had things I was trying to get done in the rear. I was trying to order some things and get things ready because I was getting out and I wanted to order a bunch of stuff through the PX catalog system. And so I went back and I was back 5th or 6th of July. DeFore was killed at the bunker, at the entrance of the mess hall bunker, the 6th or the 7th, I can't remember. And they in effect pulled all of us back and replaced all the cooks with new cooks. So I never went back up there. I went back to get my gear, and that was it. The 3 cooks that were there were wounded. 2 cooks were wounded.
So did the mess hall itself actually get hit at some point?
DeFore, he was walking out of the bunker up through the front entrance with a couple cups of coffee. He got hit in the chest, face, head with a recoilless rifle round in it.
Wow.
And all the shrapnel and he was blown back into the mess hall. And there was people down in the mess hall bunker that got blown out the back from the explosion. My cook was on the serving line. He was blown back into the storage unit. There was another one sitting in our sleeping area. He got wounded. And this is all hearsay. This is what the one that got blown into the storage area was telling me. He carried the wounded from the mess hall bunker up to the medics. He carried 2 or 3 guys up there. Of course, DeFore was laying on the serving line, and there was nothing to be done for him. He was pretty much gone. They wouldn't let them cook back out of the aid station the 2nd or 3rd time because he was covered in so much blood they thought he was dying. But actually what he got was this other guy's body smeared all over him. So.
Yeah. Now, did they send some of these guys back to Evans? Did you see them back at the base?
Right. I can't remember the guy's name, the one that was doing all the carrying. I remember he was from Racine, Wisconsin. That's all I remember. I was walking somewhere up by the mess hall, and I see this guy walking, and he just had a T-shirt on and pants and no headgear. And I thought, oh my God, we're going to get in trouble. This guy's not covered. He's not wearing the right uniform. And as he walked up, he was white. All of his clothes were white. And his face was all red. He had shrapnel in his face. And all this white that was on him, it looked like he was smeared with somebody's snots, to tell you the truth. And what it was is DeFore's brain was all over his body when his body exploded. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned that you had been, you went on R&R. Where'd you go?
I went to Sydney. I figured it was the furthest away, so that meant the airplane ride was going to be the longest. It would take the longest to get there. It would take the longest to get back.
Now, on any of these trips, do you have the same amount of time there regardless, so you have 7 days or whatever that
It
is?
was, yeah, just, it didn't
So,
matter.
so it just makes the trip just sort of that much longer for you.
Right,
that way.
yeah, I think it was like a 10-hour flight from Vietnam to Sydney, stopped off in Perth, and then went down on to Sydney.
Okay.
It
And
was
how did
method of my
yeah.
madness.
And how do they treat American servicemen there?
Wanted you to go AWOL. Don't go back, don't go back, it's not worth it. But again, we were spending money, so they didn't care.
Yeah.
Keep spending money though.
All right. And what was it like sort of having to get back on a plane and go back to Vietnam?
It wasn't that much fun, but I knew I was getting really close to leaving. It was, like June, and I knew I was going to be leaving at the end of July. I did that on purpose. I did try to stay there as long as I could, take my little vacation, and come back, and then go home.
All right. Do you think it did you good to get away for the week? It was overall put you in better shape? Or?
Oh, well, I treated it like the rest of the time I was in the Army. It was a chance to see something I'll never be able to see. I didn't have any money when I was a kid. Never thought I'd have any money, so the prospects of traveling the world were slim and none. So I had a chance to go to Australia. I've never been back to Australia, by the way, but it was a chance for me to see things I'd never be able to see in person, things that I've read about all my life. That's why I enjoyed when the rest of the 20 years when I was in, I was able to go to Europe 2 or 3 times. We drove around and saw castles and big cities and all these other things in life that you only get to read about, or it costs you a lot of money to go there on your own. I got to go there kind of sort of for free.
All right. Now, you go back to Ripcord again. Now, while you during the couple of months or whatever you spent there on Ripcord, most of the time, could you just kind of walk around during the day? Would you be out in the open, or would you sometimes when you wanted to, or would you just stay undercover?
Oh no, we just walk around. You just didn't loiter. You don't stay on the helicopter pad because that's a prime target. Anytime a helicopter comes in for landing, you try not to be up on the helicopter pad just in case something decided to come in and visit you.
And would that normally be a mortar round or a rocket?
Mortar rounds, yeah.
But there were not machine guns set up on the hills yet, or things like that?
There was a machine gun set in a cave. We had 2 Chinooks shot down. One that got shot and landed on the helicopter pad. There was a cave on this mountain just below Ripcord, and they figured the guy with the machine gun was down there, and it was always only 1 round, so they figured it was a broken machine gun that he had to manually load 1 round at a time. And he just happened to catch the Chinook as he was flying by, getting ready to land, and he shot the Chinook in the rear engine and lost the hydraulics. And he actually, there was a ammo bunker between my bunker and the helicopter pad. So you could see where his tires hit the bunker. He bounced up and actually landed up on the helicopter. He went over a mortar pit, and that's the gist of it. How we almost all got barbecued that day. But he just landed. They took him apart, flew him away, and hauled him out of there within. It was just a matter of hours. They got rid of that helicopter off the Firebase because it was just too much of a big target sitting on the helicopter pad.
Right. And during the time you're up there in the base, was this the kind of thing where you got to kind of see a lot, at least of the headquarters people or the officers and things, or did you really just kind of see people as they came through to get food?
Just saw people when they came through to get food. We just did the job that we were supposed to be doing. We hand out sea rations at lunch. You had breakfast to prepare, supper to serve. They actually would bring supper to us. Because we were so small, we didn't have a place to cook, but we did cook breakfast every morning. 1 hot meal that we made there. The other hot meal was brought to us in Mermite cans.
Yeah, so these big metal containers. Yeah. All right. And now, how at the point when you go off Ripcord, sort of, were you just relieved to be going, or did you think you ought to be staying longer, or?
At the time it was getting close for me to go home, so I was more thinking about, it's time for me to go home. The thing that made me stop from going up there was the mess sergeant didn't want me or the other two guys that had been up there and got hurt to stay up there any longer.
Mm-hmm.
We'd had our chance.
Mm-hmm.
We'd all seen something. I didn't get hurt or anything, but all the other ones got hurt to a certain extent.
Yeah.
So it was just time for me to go. Once they told me that I wasn't going back up there, I had to convince them to let me go so I could get my gear, because I'd left my duffel bag and everything. Because I'd only come down for the day. I went down like on, let's say, the 5th. They called me up and said there's no more helicopters coming up. And then they called a little while later and said, oh, we got one more log bird. If you can be here in 5 minutes. Well, it's like a 10-minute walk over to where the helicopter pad is from where the mess hall was. So I told them, nah, don't worry about it. I'll just fly out tomorrow morning. It's not that big of a deal. And then that next morning is when DeFore was killed. And I was sitting up on the helicopter pad waiting on the log bird, and they told me, there's no need for you to go up there. The mess hall got blown off the hillside this morning. I'm like, a little exaggeration. It was just one person that was killed in the doorway.
Now, did you actually go back to get your stuff in the end?
I sure did. Yes. Yeah. I went back, grabbed my gear. Just like I say, it was one duffel bag. Couldn't get anybody to bring it or to send it to me. They said, well, you got to go out and get it. So I flew out, grabbed my duffel bag, waited, picked my duffel bag up. On the way back, they were dropping off ammunition and supplies to a platoon out on a hilltop somewhere between Ripcord and Evans. So we stopped there long enough to throw everything out of the helicopter, and then we took off and came back to Evans. That was the last time.
All right. And then how much longer did you stay on Evans before you left?
Gosh, I was out by the 24th of July, so I want to say I was in Cam Ranh Bay again on the 14th, 15th, 16th, something like that. And then again flew out of Cam Ranh Bay to Fort Lewis, Washington. That's where I was mustered out of the service.
And what was the mood like on the plane as you were leaving?
Oh, well, everybody was yelling and screaming and cheering as soon as the airplane took off. Yeah, as soon as we left Vietnamese airspace, yeah.
All right. And then where did they take you in the States?
We landed again in Japan, and they told us not to buy anything because the plane was already almost at max. So if you buy a bunch of stuff, we might be overweight and won't be able to take off. So of course the guys all had money in their pockets. They were buying stereos and radios and all kinds of stuff. I bought a lens for a camera. That was it. And that was exciting taking off from Japan. We took the entire runway. And, when you get to the end of the runway, you got the little lights.
Yep.
We were still on the ground at those little lights at the end of the runway. And we finally made it off. So we were all happy.
All right. And then when you go back to Fort Lewis or somewhere else? Or?
Fort Lewis, yep.
Okay.
Went to another part of the base, and that's where I was, did all the testings and things that you have to do to get out. They give you a medical exam and all that.
All right. And at that point, do they discharge you? Or?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Gave me an airplane ticket, and I flew back to Boise.
All right. Now, when you get to the airport, did you see any signs of protesters or things like that?
They told us not to look at anybody in the eye, not to say hi to anybody, not to talk to anybody, because there were protesters there, and you were going to get spit on. And so I did that. I just walked in, got my ticket, waited in the area, got on the plane, and flew back to Boise.
Okay. And were you still in uniform at this time?
Correct. Yeah, you had to fly in Class A uniforms. Yeah.
Okay. Because you have periods there in Vietnam where people will come back and they'll immediately change clothes in the airport or something like that.
Right.
But that wasn't what you were doing.
Well, I guess it's because I didn't buy any civilian clothes when I was at Fort Lewis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it just wasn't an option for me.
Yeah. And actually, you got a better fare or whatever if you were wearing a
I
uniform.
believe so, yeah.
Okay.
And I was proud of my service. I didn't care what anybody else said.
All right. Okay. And did your family know you were coming?
Yes, yep. My mother met me at the airport, and that was it. Went home, took the uniform off, found some civilian clothes, and said, well, time to start life now. Go get a job.
Okay. And what sort of job did you find?
I was driving a delivery car. I delivered eyeglasses to the different opticians in Boise.
Mm-hmm.
Got the job through a buddy of mine who worked at the same company.
Okay. And how long did you stay with that?
2.5 years, maybe 3.
Okay.
Because I went back in after 3 years.
All right.
Not quite 3 years, I think it was.
Okay. And then what motivated you to re-enlist?
Wages in Boise were crappy. Couldn't see any future in working minimum wage in the city of Boise. Happened to talk to a recruiter at the state fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, I said, how much are privates making nowadays? And he told me, and then we talked. He said, well, you haven't been out very long. You'll go back in as an E4.
Mm-hmm.
He said, this is what you'll be making. And I looked at that. I knew what my wages were on a weekly basis, monthly basis, and I was going to double my take-home pay.
Mm-hmm.
I said, sign me up. And that was the end of that.
Okay. Now, do you go back in as a cook or something else?
Nope, I stayed a cook. I had to, that was the key. I actually wanted to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
But they said to keep my rank for what it was. I actually lost two ranks
Mm-hmm.
by going in as an E4. To keep my rank, I had to go back in as a cook. So I just went back in and stayed that way for the entire 20 years.
Okay.
Now,
Now,
20 years.
Now, at this point, had you gotten married yet, or did that come later? Or?
No, I got married. I met my wife after I got out the first time.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to say she sobered me up at nights. My buddies and I would go running the bars in the evening after work. When the bars closed, we'd stop at the truck stop. She was a waitress, and she'd serve me coffee all night long until it's 3, 4, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, and went home, slept for 2 hours, and go back to work, and then start the drinking. Then the next night, did that for quite a while.
All right. And then, so you get married, and then you're going to go back in the Army, and what was her reaction to that?
I think we sat down and talked about it quite a bit, because I said, this is what's going to happen. Can you stand to be my wife? And I may be sent away for a year or 2 at a time, be separated. I said, it's not going to be an easy life. I said, we'll have an okay life. And we discussed all of that before I went back in.
But you probably did a little bit better sales pitch than that, because it seemed to have worked.
It did work. She's still married to me after 40, it'll be 40 years this coming July.
July, and you re-enlisted the middle of July.
Yep.
1st of August.
All right. We were basically, we gotten to the point in your story where now you're heading back to Europe. So, or actually, yeah. So you're back. Well, what's your first duty station once you re-enlist? Is that still in the States?
Still in the States, Fort Eustis, Virginia, headquarters company, United States Training Command. I fed the MPs and all the instructors for the school at Fort Eustis.
Okay. Now, are you feeding them anything better or different from what you were feeding people back in Vietnam?
Well, yeah, because you had fresh vegetables, lettuces and tomatoes, and everything was fresher. Fresh bread, sliced fresh bread, milk that wasn't sour. It was just normal everyday guy food.
Okay, and then your wife came with you for this assignment? Yeah.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
And then-
We'd just gotten married, and that was her first duty assignment with me, was Fort Eustis.
And did you live on or off the base?
We lived off base, could not get on base housing.
And then did she take a job while you were out there? Or?
Yes, she did. She worked for Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah, so we could, because my pay wasn't that great. You still had to have a place to live,
Yeah.
food, pay maintenance on the car, and things like that. So yeah, she worked just down the street from where we lived, though.
Okay.
So it worked out okay.
All right, and then how long did you stay at Fort Eustis?
Exactly a year, I believe it was, maybe a year and a half, and then I got orders to go to Europe.
Now, at the time you're going back into the Army, it's sort of 73. I mean, this is Vietnam is sort of drawing down.
Correct.
The Army was, I think, on some level, sort of downsizing or whatever. But did they still just have need for certain kinds of people, or?
I'm assuming they did because they let me back in.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there, could you tell at all if sort of the whole way Vietnam had wound down, did that have any kind of effect on morale any place, either there or in Germany later?
In Germany, we went through a lot of race relation classes, as I remember. There was still a lot of problems between blacks and whites at the time, and they were trying to get everybody to get on the same book as to understand why there was a difference between the whites and the blacks. And like I said, we went through a lot of race relation classes.
Mm-hmm.
At least I think that's what they called them.
But probably training command at Fort Eustis would have been kind of a different atmosphere anyway.
Yes, because we didn't have anything to do with any of the people that were there in training. I think Fort Eustis was a transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So one side of the base they taught them how to drive trucks. The other side of the base they actually taught them how to repair helicopters. And then for a while there was an OCS training camp at Fort Eustis.
Mm-hmm.
But we strictly took care of feeding the people that worked in the headquarters company, the MPs and such.
So you've got people who were, to a large degree, sort of professionals or lifers or guys who were making careers in the Army, or they just
no,
happened to have that assignment?
No, because you still have the privates and E4s and E5s, the guys that are just doing their time, get ready to, just, they want to get their time done and get out.
Okay. All right. So you put that in for a year, and then what do you get to do next?
Got orders, again, for Germany, and we went on vacation. I'm not sure how I swung it, but there was some way I got it to where the wife traveled with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was exciting. She was at home at the time. No, she wasn't. They came and packed us up, I think,
Mm-hmm.
in Virginia. And then we went home on vacation, flew back to Fort Dix, got on an airplane together, landed in Frankfurt, went to a reception station, I guess. I'm not sure how that worked. I know we got tickets. They told us where we were going to be assigned, which was 29th Trans, Army Airfield, Stuttgart, Germany. So we went there. I showed up with my wife, and they said, "You've got your wife with you."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the way it works. And so they had to work together. We had to put us in a hotel because the military housing was all full. And so I just went to work every day, and she was stuck in the hotel.
And how long did that last?
I don't know.
So how long did that last?
39 days.
Oh, 39 days we stayed in the hotel. Okay.
Not a minute too soon.
Yeah. And neither one of us speaking German. Never
Mhm.
been there before. Oh, I passed through Germany.
Yeah, right.
But never had any language training. Fortunately, there was a British gal that worked at the hotel, and she was able to help us out quite a bit.
Mhm.
But it was always fun ordering food that you didn't know what the heck you were eating. And in that meantime, we had to buy a car. I had to get my driver's license. She had to get her driver's license. We had to look for a place to live. She actually got her driver's license before I did.
Mhm.
She passed the test before me.
Well, you were a cook, not a driver.
Yeah, well, you have to drive when you're in
All right.
You have to get a, European license.
Mm-hmm. All right. And now, you still in E4 at this time, or are you E5 by now?
I was an E5 by then, I believe.
And that might be why they let you bring her along. I don't know.
Could be. I'm not sure. I just know we did it, and I'm not. And everybody was surprised that she showed up. Usually, you go before,
Right.
you get everything taken care of, and then they send her over. And that's just not the way it worked for us.
All right. Yeah, you said that you had to do with things like race relations classes and so forth. Were there any incidents or problems by the time you were there, or was it just they're trying to make sure that nothing happens?
When you talk to the guys individually, there was still a lot of problems. But when they were at work, they, you had a job to do, and everybody just seemed to do it. I mean, again, you always have the guy that's not going to show up to work on time. You're going to find the one that's going to be drunk when he comes to work. That went through the entire 20 years I was in the Army. I can tell you, and nothing changed in 20 years. You always have somebody who's going to show up drunk, especially on weekends. You're always going to have somebody who's going to show up late, and you just make do with what you got and then deal with it later.
Was the quality of people you were working with over the course of 20 years much different over time? Or?
When I first went back in, I thought everybody was terrible. Nobody wanted to do work. Nobody wanted to do anything. They just wanted to do their time and get out.
Mm-hmm.
It was towards the end of the draftees and stuff.
Yeah.
When it became an all-volunteer army, gosh, it was a lot better. A lot better. People came in, they did their job because they knew they didn't have to be there. They wanted to be there. Different attitude.
Okay. So at least in that area, having the all-volunteer army sort of made things work better?
I think it did, yeah.
Okay.
And people work together. I'm sure there's still, race problems. It's a huge country we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got their own idea of what they need to be doing in life.
But there's no longer a conspiracy against any particular group that's throwing them all in the army or whatever else.
I'm not going to go that far. You're always going to find somebody that there's a conspiracy against them.
Oh, yeah.
Whoever them may be.
But the conspiracy didn't make them enlist, though.
No. They, for the most part, people figured it was an okay way to make a living and survive in this world.
All right. Now, while you're in Germany, did you change bases at some point?
Right. First, I don't know. I think it wasn't quite a year. Maybe it was a year we were there because you go for 3 years. They moved us from Stuttgart Army Airfield over to Nellingen Barracks. They did heavy maintenance on helicopters at Nellingen, and so they moved us over there for some reason. I don't remember why we moved. I just know we moved from the mess hall that was on the air base. It was a joint base anyway. It was Army and the Air Force. So we had Army and Air Force cooks working there. And then we moved over to Nellingen, took over one of the big mess halls there, and that was the last time we ever went out to the airfield.
All right. And was this are you moving kind of across town basically, or did you have to change apartments or?
No, we stayed in the same apartments. Okay. We lived in a town called Bonelanden, as I remember. So it ended up that maybe we had an extra 20 minutes to drive to and from home. Mm-hmm. It was just a little further south of the airport. I don't really remember, how it's laid out. I just know that the airport's over here. You drive over here, it's the town of Nellingen, and that's where our base was.
Okay. And did you have the chance to kind of take your car and go places and do things?
Yes, we did. After that, we bought a car, and then I got rid of the German car. We bought an American car. By this time, we had our first child, and we did some traveling around. We went as many places as we could. We took a vacation down to Italy, through Switzerland, Luxembourg, back into Germany with our son.
All right. And you finish out 3 years, and basically, had you decided at this point you were going to kind of make a career in the Army? And
oh, well, when I joined, that was our prime thing.
Okay.
I'm not going to get out again. If I go in, I'm staying for 20 years. And so we knew we were going to be going traveling.
Right. Okay. Now, after Germany, where do you go next?
Got orders for Fort Hood, Texas, I believe it was. And in between Fort Hood and Germany and Fort Hood, I went to advanced training for my job as a cook, and then went on to Fort Hood.
And what do you get in advanced training for a cook? Is it supervising? Or?
Right, more supervising. I was an NCO then, so it's just just a higher grade. There's more things you need to know: how to take care of your people, how to supervise your people,
right? How
to read a map.
All right, so Fort Hood, so that's home of the 2nd Armored Division?
Yeah, among other things. The 1st Cav was there. Yep. I unfortunately or fortunately got stuck with the 2nd Armored Division, so I chased tanks for 3 years.
And would they literally have you out in the field on exercises?
You betcha. The last 2 vehicles in any company convoy of tanks, the last vehicle is the mechanic's trucks, and the one right in front of him is the mess hall. So we were literally at the end of the line, and I want to tell you, those tanks can put up an awful lot of dust at Fort Hood, Texas.
That's right. Now, are you in just in a truck, or do you have an armored personnel carrier, or what do you have?
Nope, we have a deuce and a half with a water trailer behind it, and all your gear is stuffed in the back of the deuce and a half.
Okay.
And you just drive all over.
And you've got your standard equipment, field kitchen, and you just set up and
Right. Yep. Well, you set up a tent, put your stoves out, put your ice chests out, camouflage everything, and you just cook from a tent.
All right. And did you stay with units that were out in the field and doing maneuvers the whole time you're at Fort Hood, or do you get larger barracks, larger facilities to work in sometimes?
Correct. Yeah, we have a main mess hall because you have a mess hall for one battalion, and then you have all the different companies in the battalion. So each company has its own set of cooks. But when you're in the rear, everybody works together, and it's just like before. You work. You get in there in the morning. You cook breakfast, lunch, go home. Next day you come back and serve lunch, supper. Come back the next day, breakfast, lunch, go home. But then after you get off at noon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you have to go maintain your own individual equipment. You have to go pull maintenance on your trucks, clean your field equipment, go to the rifle range, all kinds of other things. So there's more involved.
And when you're doing the maintenance and the cleaning and stuff, do you now get to order other men to do that?
Yes, because by that time I was an E6. Mm-hmm. So I was in charge of a mess team again.
All right. And then you spent, how long did you spend at Fort Hood that time?
Fort Hood, we were there just 1 year because Second Armed Division was opening a base forward in Germany. And so our battalion was selected to go back to Germany and maintain this base. So after 3 years in Germany, we got to stay home for 1 year, went back to Germany for another 3 years in Garlstedt, Germany, which is just north of Bremen.
Okay. So that's way up by the North Sea.
By the North Sea, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like an hour's drive to Bremerhaven, and about a half-hour drive from Garlstedt to Bremen.
Okay. But you were kind of sort of small town out in the country someplace, or?
Yeah.
All right.
Garlstedt was, Karl Schultz Kaserne, I think it was called, was just out in the middle of nowhere. They built a brand new base for the 2nd Armored Division there. So you just drive down through this highway or road, and then there's a little cut in the trees, and you take a little cut through the trees, and there you are at this big base. And we actually didn't live on base. We lived in a town 10, 15 kilometers away that they built housing just for the Americans that the Germans built for us.
All right. And now, were you disappointed to have to go back to Germany that quickly, or were?
You bet. Yeah, that was a miserable next 3 years. We were hoping to spend some time at home, be able to go visit family and stuff, and we only got one chance to visit family, and that was it. It was a bummer.
Yeah. And was the Graustadt, was that better or worse a place to live than Stuttgart had been?
I think it was more depressing because we didn't want to go back that soon.
Okay.
Up in northern Germany, the wind blows all the time. It rains all the time. It's cloud covered all the time. In the 3 years there, we joked about how many sunny days we had in a summer, and it averaged maybe 3. So it was just depressing. In the winter, it snowed like a son of a gun, and it always blew in. The wind would come in off the North Sea. So all the trees bend east because of the constant blowing of the wind. And of course, coming in off the North Sea, you got all the snow, the rain, the crummy weather. It wasn't any fun. Well, like I say, we were depressed that we had to go back so soon.
Okay. When you do, so you survived 3 years of that. So did you kind of get in the car and go south whenever you could?
In Germany?
Yeah.
Yes, we had my mess sergeant that we had when we were down in the Stuttgart area at Nelligan Barracks. He had come back to Germany, and he had made E8, and they had sent him to a meat cutting school. And when they sent him back to Germany, he ran the commissary, meat section of the commissary in, I think it was called Ludwigsburg. No, it wasn't Ludwigsburg. It was somewhere in the Stuttgart area. He ran the commissary.
Kelly Barracks.
Patch barracks.
Okay.
And so we'd go down there and visit them once in a while, but other than that, we just did our normal little driving around. We went into Holland, and we went up on the North Sea a lot because it on the sunny days, the 3 or 4 sunny days a year we had up there in the summer, we'd go up on the North Sea to I can't remember the name of the town, somewhere on the North Sea. We went up there.
All right. So now you get back again. Where do you go next?
Fort Hood, back to Fort Hood. I had a choice. I had 2 sets of orders: Fort Polk or Fort Hood. Heard a lot of bad things about Fort Polk. At the time, the rumor going around was if you got stationed at Fort Polk, you got kicked out of the Army. Because it just, for some reason, a lot of people that went to Fort Polk got put out of the Army. And I thought, well, don't want to do that really. Fort Hood is just a little bit closer to Idaho, so we'd be at least a little closer to family. So I selected Fort Hood.
All right.
And that became my home base for some reason. I never went any place in the States other than Fort Hood.
All right. And now what unit did you get attached to this time?
I think that was 110th Aviation, I think.
So is that helicopters or
Helicopters,
Okay.
yeah.
So you're not following tanks anymore?
No, thank goodness. No, they had a whole different culture to break into. The flyboys, the prima donnas.
So what was that like then?
A lot. For me, it was fun because I got to fly every place. You know, when we'd go to set up a field site, instead of driving there and looking at something, they'd fly you in. You'd see where you were going to set up. They'd fly you back. So it was a little more fun for us, for me.
And how long did you stay there this time?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And got orders for Korea.
All right. And Korea, you're going to go by yourself?
Go by myself, yes.
And was that just a one-year tour?
A 1-year tour, yes. And the wife stayed at Fort Hood
Okay.
because I knew I was coming back.
All right. And so where in Korea did they put you?
I was 8 miles south of the DMZ. The town I think was called Yeonjagal. I was assigned to, I think it was headquarters company, 4th of the 7th Cav.
And that's just standard work on the base and cook?
Work on the base. Well, at that time I was the E7, so I actually ran the mess hall, so I didn't have to do
You
any
didn't do
cooking.
that stuff, yeah.
I got to sit in an office. I really enjoyed that. When they went to go to the field, I stood at the office window and waved at the convoys they went by. I thought that was just the greatest thing since bubblegum.
And what impression did you have of Korea, especially after having been in Vietnam before?
Cold, beautiful country. I liked it. It was a beautiful country. But boy, does it get cold in the wintertime in Korea. In the summertime, everything's beautiful green, the rice paddies and such. But you know, you don't have your family there, so that's, you know, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Now, did you have much contact with Koreans, either civilian or military?
Right, we had civilian KPs and a lot of civilian contractors on base. So I worked a lot with them. They all spoke English, so there was no language barrier there. They'd been working for the Americans since the end of the Korean War, so they spoke English better than a lot of Americans.
And did you travel around at all, or just stay in the base?
Worked 7 days a week, actually 6 days a week, I'm sorry. So on Sunday was your one day off, if you had a day off. And so again, they had tours through the rec center, go on tours, or at the rec center on Sundays, they'd have like bingo or something like that, so go down and play bingo.
Were you close enough to go to Seoul, or was that too far away?
I went to Seoul, well, I went to Seoul a couple of times when I was in the first place in can't remember the name of the town now. Went there a few times with people and take a bus and ride in there and go to different places. They moved me from that base to Uijeongbu, to another base that 4th and 7th Cav operated. And from that one, every Sunday I was off, I went into Seoul just to eat a McDonald's, eat a Dunkin' Donuts, or a KFC. You know, you had American restaurants there, so it was like, it's kind of like being back in the States, kind of, sort of.
Yeah. What was the mood or the atmosphere there? Was there some kind of level of worry about what the North Koreans might be up to, or did you just assume that nothing was going to happen?
No, you had to be concerned about it. The first base, they said we had 30 minutes to live, if they decided to come across the border.
Mhm.
We were on the north side of a mountain, so if they fired rockets, and they knew they had rockets, all the rockets will land on the north side of the hill, and we were on the north side of the hill. Weijambu, the base was on the south side of the mountain, so it was going to be more harder for them to hit us.
Mhm.
I don't think they ever told us how long we had to get out of Dodge there. Our job, at the first place though, was to move forward to the DMZ, because we were only 8 kilometers away. So if anything happened, we would move forward. The other one, we would stay where we were at, and the helicopters would go forward.
All right. And how did the Koreans seem to view the American servicemen there?
Loved you as long as you're spending money. Just like any place you go, even to this day, they're going to love you as long as you're spending your money in their country.
All right. And then how much communication did you have with home then while you were over there?
I think I called home once a week. They had phone booths, and I'd call home once a week. It was nice to be able to hear the family.
And so
I'd
what
write
year-
letters
yeah.
every day.
And what year have we gotten to by this time?
84, 85, I think.
Okay.
Or did I go there in 85 and come home in 86? 85, 86, there you go.
All right. Mid-Reagan era at that point. I mean, there had been some saber rattling over Korea a little bit earlier. Korean airliner going down and...
Yeah, that happened just before I went over there, as I remember. And I flew out on Korean Air. That wasn't too much fun. It was Korean Air 007, something like that.
Or 707 maybe,
Yeah.
old jet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was glad to leave. You just kind of have to think about something could happen. I mean, they were always catching spies the year I was there. We had leaflets flying onto our base that they were sending balloons across the border, and they'd get so far, and a little trap door opens, and all these leaflets will come down, and there was all these North Korean leaflets all over the place every once in a while, or the Koreans would bring them to us so they could laugh about it. But the Koreans weren't worried too much about it, so it's like, okay, well, if they're not worried, why should I be too worried? You got to be concerned, but.
And in the times when you were in Germany, was there ever much concern that the Soviets would do anything?
When we were up in northern Germany, we were supposed to hold, I think it's called a Fulda Gap. So the family had to have bags and baggage ready. They were supposed to be picked up and taken someplace and be flown out of the country immediately, or moved further west so they could be gotten out of the country, because they gave us a timeline on how long it was going to take the Russians to come through and actually hit us in Garlstedt. Our job was to move forward and stop them, delay them until reinforcements could get back to there from the States or from other parts of Germany.
Right.
And then our other concern was we had to get up and hold the line between Germany and I think it's Denmark.
Yeah, you're good there. Yeah.
Okay, because there's some ammo bunkers in Denmark that they don't want the Russians to get a hold of, because it's got things up there that are nasty.
All right. So you were aware that, okay, you're still in an army and there are possibilities and dangers and threats, and you're there providing security for a reason. Okay.
A little more so in northern Germany. We were there. We actually got shot at. We'd do our maneuvers and go up along the border of East Germany, and again, that was a tank company, so we'd go up and drive along these roads along the border, and some of our tanks were getting shot at by the East German guards. They'd shoot at them with rifles. I've seen ricochet marks on the sides of tanks. Every time we'd go up that direction, we'd get shot at.
Did your guys get shot at in Korea, the ones you're sending forward, or?
No.
Okay.
We never occupied the DMZ.
Okay.
That wasn't our job. We had scout cars and helicopters, but our helicopters were the Cobras sitting back at Weijambu. And then the scout cars were supposed to go up and hold the line while the Cobras came up and helped them out. And then, of course, as the mess hall, you'd just grab all your gear and move wherever they wanted you to go to make a meal.
All right. So you complete the tour in Korea. You come back to Fort Hood again now to
Correct.
kind of finish things out?
Yep.
All right, and then what unit do you get this time?
3rd Signal Brigade, and went through all the different companies there. I can't remember the numbers, like it was like 329th or I don't know, 312th. But we worked out a big, huge mess hall. There were 75, 79 cooks working in the mess hall, running 4 shifts.
So where are you on the totem pole in terms of running a mess there?
Well, yeah, the mess hall was being run by an E8, so I was a nobody. So I ran shifts. And then towards the end there, I was the training NCO and maintenance NCO. So every day before the cooks would come in to work, around noon, they'd go to work. We'd start serving at, let's say, noon. So at 11 o'clock or 11:30, I'd give a class every day on basic military skills. And then during the rest of the day, I would, if something broke, I'd call in work orders. If it something I could fix, I would fix it, that kind of thing. I was just the maintenance guy.
Right.
So something broke down, I'd have to take it to the main warehouse where it would be repaired, things like that.
Okay. And you finished out your Army career in that slot?
Right, correct.
Okay. So you get out 1990, and then what do you do once you're done?
We had gone home. I'd hurt myself. I tore a meniscus in my knee, so I went home on convalescent leave in the summer of '90, June, July, and to specifically look for a house, maybe apply for jobs and things like that. Yeah. So we were home on vacation. This startup company in Idaho called Micron, they were hiring, so I filled out an application and took it in, and didn't think much about it. Finished. I can't remember any place else that I applied for. Most people said, "Well, yeah, apply when you get out," because I was going to be getting out in November, December. I think it was 1st of December. And they said, "Well, just come on back." I said, "We'll have openings." And I was looking for cooking jobs. Micron was not. It was a manufacturing company. And so we did that. We found a house. I went back. They moved in after I came back, though, because we couldn't get in July. I can't remember what time we moved in. We moved in October? Okay. So it wasn't until October. So the wife and the kids stayed with the family friend, and until I got back in December, excuse me, November. I think I took a terminal leave in the 1st of November or something like that.
Okay, and then did you take the job with Micron? Is that what happened? Or?
While I was gone, they called the wife and said, "We'd like him to come in and interview." She says, "Well, he's not really here at the moment. He'll be home 1 November. And they said, "Well, as soon as he gets home, give us a call, and we'll set up an interview." So I got an interview with the company. They offered me a job. I actually had an interview with the CEO of the company. At the time, he was a real hands-on guy, and he gave the final yes or no on any hire. And I went in there as a machine operator making computer memory chips.
All right, and then you got that job and...
Got that job and stayed with that company for 16 and a half years.
All right.
And then they started opening plants in China and Taiwan. All of a sudden the company started making, or losing money. So they took all of us and laid us all off because they weren't making any money. The company's still running today, but they run on temp hires. They got rid of all of us that were having, vacation pay, insurance, 401ks. Now they don't pay any of that out. They're still in business.
Okay. And then did you go find other work after that? Or?
Well, correct. I got laid off, I think it was like the 1st of August of 2008. And I was really in a tizzy because I didn't know what I was going to do. Cook, manufacturing, held many jobs at Micron. But it's manufacturing, basically. You hit a start button, you hit a stop button. So I went, applied for unemployment, some schooling. I heard an ad on the TV, not TV, on the radio, about this company that did tech support for the Navy. So I went back to the unemployment office for the state, and I said, is this company for real? It sounds like they're selling car insurance to me. And like, it sounded really cheesy. The guy said, oh no, that's a great company to work for. Do you want me to put a word in for you? And I said, sure, why not? I can try it. I play with computers a lot. I should be able to help somebody with a broken down computer. I had an interview with the EDS, Electronic Data System, and they said, well, we'd like to offer you a job. I said, well, you know, I'm not school trained or anything. They said, we'll train you. And so I took the job, and I worked there for 2.5 years. We got bought out by HP. Right after, and I was doing real good. You know, they test you.
Yeah.
They listen to your calls and they grade you, things like that. My scores 90, 95, 100%. I got like 300 or 400% in a row. I got a little trophy. That was, you know, I walked on water. HP took over. All of a sudden, all my scores were going 50, 55, 60, 25. It's like, I haven't changed any. What's wrong with my scores? They said, well, that's what we want to know from you. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm doing the exact same thing. I went to work one day. It was in January of 2010. And I was doing my work, and they said, when you get off this call, I need to talk to you. So the supervisor grabbed me, walked me back in this office. They said, we're going to let you go. Your scores are too low. I was like, okay. And they said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, if I got to go, I got to go. He said, well, you don't have any medical insurance as of today also. And I said, well, that's good because I never had any of your medical insurance. By that time, I'd gotten on TRICARE. Right. And they kind of both looked at me like, oh, we don't have anything to gouge you with, you know. And I said, well, thanks. I said, I really appreciated working here. I said, I learned a lot. I wish I could have learned a lot more. And so they walked me out, and that was the end of that. I thought, well, I'll never get unemployment. I applied for unemployment, and they didn't fight it at all. For a huge company, even the unemployment people said, that's really strange that they're not fighting this. Because in effect, I was fired for not doing my job. And that's one of the things that keep you from getting unemployment, you know. And I said, well, you know, those guys I worked with they're really nice. I had no problem with my supervisor. And he seemed really sad that he was firing me, you know. And I just, you know, why get mad, you know. So that was the end of that. Waited a couple of months, and then I got a job with the U.S. Census. And I worked with the Census for 6 months.
Now, are you at a point where you're collecting a military pension, or is that?
Oh, well, of course, yeah. In 1990, I started collecting a military pension, yes.
Okay. I guess, what kind of, different kinds of questions to kind of close out interviews with. Yours is a little bit different from most. You spent 20-odd military, really in a way, kind of spanned about 23 years in the military if you go from the beginning. Did military food change any in that time? Was it still the same stuff at the end as at the beginning?
Yes. Maybe a little better quality foods we were getting. The Germans had come up with this UHT milk, ultra high temperature milk. So when you went to the field, your milk never was sour. If you went out in the field and you kept the milk at ambient temperature the entire time, throw it in an ice chest full of ice and chill it down, it was perfectly good milk. Or you could drive all over Texas with this milk sitting in the back of your truck, and it would never go bad because it had been this ultra high temperature pasteurization or whatever it is. But the food basically remained the same. We went from C rations to MREs. Nobody liked the MREs. Nobody liked the C rations. And then when the MREs came out, and all they had was MREs, everybody wanted to go back to C ration because it was a better food.
Why? What makes the C ration better than the MRE?
Gosh, I don't know. I think it was tastier. Although there's good and bad with both of them. You know, I always liked this spicy beef, turkey loaf, chicken loaf. The beans in Frankfurt, passable, or not, limas and ham. The MREs, the only one I remember, because I didn't get to use them that much, they had ham steaks, and they were really good. And they had chili, that was good. Spaghetti was good.
So the chili was better than you could make with ham and limas.
Oh yeah, a lot better. And it looked a lot better looking. It was more appealing to the eye than chili made out of ham and limas.
And what variety of sea rations would you refuse to eat?
Oh, the ones I didn't. I stayed away from the spaghetti. Spaghetti was just nasty. There was nothing you could do with the spaghetti to make it edible. It was just a big plug of starch
Mm-hmm.
with these things that looked like noodles. And no matter how you heated it, it stayed at a plug of starch, and it was nasty. So the rest of it was okay.
All right. What do you think in the end it was that you kind of took out of the experience in the Army?
Gosh, I never thought of that. I took a retirement. My sole goal in life was to survive and get my retirement, and that was actually the only thing I looked forward to in the entire time. I did my job. I think I learned how to work with all kinds of people. Doesn't matter what race you are, what country you're from. I've learned to find some way to be more of appealing to these people, to somebody. While working at Micron, I worked with a guy from Iraq, and to this day I still talk to this guy. He's back in Iraq now, but I was the only person that during Ramadan would come up to him and give him the proper greeting for the time of Ramadan, and he thought that was just like the greatest thing since bubblegum. Again.
Yeah. And I guess speaking of Iraq, you go out in 1990. 1991, you get Saddam goes into Kuwait. You get Desert Storm. Did they try to bring you back?
Well, I was on my way back to Texas when Saddam attacked, and I thought, oh crap, what are they doing? I'm trying to retire. I got back, and by the time I get back there, they're getting everything ready to go. They already know the 3rd Signal Brigade's going to go. We had just fielded this brand new phone system that the Army took over. Instead of having radio saying Charlie Mike 1, this is Alpha, whatever, you just reach down between the seats and punch in a number and pick up your telephone. It's the Army cell service. So they knew they were going. So I had to get all my gear together. And the Sergeant Major kept saying, you're going to go to Iraq. I said, no, I'm going to retire. He said, no, you're going to go to Iraq. I said, no, I'm going to retire. He said, Sergeant Critchlow, God damn it, you're going to go to Iraq. I said, nah, I don't think so, I'm going to retire. Went to retirement services, said, my Sergeant Major says I'm going to Iraq. He says, have you put in an extension? I said, no. He says, do you want to put an extension in for your retirement? I said, not particularly, no. He says, then you're going to retire. I said, can you do me a favor? I said, can you call my Sergeant Major? I gave him the number and said, can you tell him what I'm going to do on the 1st of November? He said, oh, sure. I called up Sergeant Major so-and-so, don't remember the guy's name. He says, this is retirement services. We just want to let you know that Sergeant Critchlow is going to retire on the 1st of November. And he said, no, he's not going to go to Iraq. He said, he's going to retire. He didn't put in an extension. You can't make him put in an extension. It's strictly up to him. And I said, he hung up the phone. I said, was the Sergeant Major mad? He says, yeah, he kind of acted like he was a little miffed. I said, oh, okay. So I get back, and when you retire, they throw a little party for you. You get a medal. They always give you something. I got leave papers, and that was it. Never got my getting out of the Army medal. They refused to give me a medal because I didn't want to go. They wanted to give me like another RCOM, and I said, if that's all you can come up with, I said, you take the RCOM and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. I don't need that. Didn't have any medals when I came in the Army. I don't need another one. I said, you can't beat the one and only one that's dear to my heart anyway, so unless you can get one that's higher than what I have, yeah, you're not helping me out.
And what did you have?
Well, my highest medal is a Bronze Star.
And what did you get the Bronze Star for?
For being in Vietnam.
Okay.
I think it says something like meritorious duty in the face of a hostile force. Basically, the 101st gave everybody a Bronze Star. They figured you're going to be in so much crap, everybody deserves one.
And
again, that's one of the other reasons why I went to all these different things. And while I was in Vietnam, I wasn't going to be given a medal like that by sitting on my duff at the rear.
Okay. You were on the Firebases.
I was on the Firebase, so I felt like I earned that.
Right.
So again, they couldn't give me anything at retirement that was better than that. I didn't need it.
All right. Well, I'd just like to close out by thanking you for taking the time to talk to me this
Well,
afternoon.
thank you for interviewing me.